Dave, thanks for taking the time. We Must Go. Fantastic documentary. What
Thank you
drew
so much.
what drew you to the project?
Both Chad and I grew up playing soccer, our whole lives, and I was actually at the World Cup in 2010 with my brother-in-law, and I'm sitting there in the stadium when the U.S. lost to Ghana, and I'm texting Chad, who's back in the States, and I'm saying, man, we need to find a story around the World Cup, something that, has us as a potential climax because it's such an amazing event. And at that time, obviously, Bob Bradley was still coaching the United States national team. But he soon thereafter gets fired and ends up coaching the Egyptian team, and right away we thought, well, that's a really interesting story to see. We approached it as a fish out of water, thinking, oh, this is all going to be about Bob, and it's going to be Bob's story. And once we sort of got into the film, we realized that it would be such a huge disservice to the people of Egypt to make this film about, the great American white savior coming in to lead a team to glory. And so we tried, to find other ways into that story that could capture the experience of the Egyptian people as a whole. And that led us to some pretty interesting characters.
Yeah, it was like you were watching not necessarily a documentary on soccer, but it was a documentary of interwoven lives and historical events. Did that just kind of unfold as you were putting all the material together?
It did. We always use the line that we were trying to use soccer as a lens to which to explain Egypt. And, as we started to get our hands, involved and get our heads around the story, we realized that, it is. It's so much bigger than soccer. So we definitely went to it as thinking it was going to be a sports film, and then realized that sports are just a part of a much larger story. You can't separate politics from soccer in Egypt. It's just impossible. And so that had to become part of the film, and it became something I think that we're very proud of, but definitely not something we expected. Chad and I are not, by any stretch of the imagination, experts on foreign policy or Middle East affairs, or I don't really know that either of us had an understanding of what was happening in Egypt beyond what you see on the nightly news. And so it was really an education for us as well, and it was something that we hoped we could sort of lure in the casual soccer fan based on it being a story about soccer, and then also have them take that same journey that we did to understand Egypt a little bit better by the end of the film.
Yeah, how was that journey for you? Like you mentioned, you approached it from a soccer perspective, then came across the story of the politics of it. Was it a complete culture shock, and the only connection was soccer?
Absolutely. I mean, it was a total culture shock. It was, we always say we kind of approach each one of our docs like a master class, and that we take a topic that we know a little bit about or are just interested in, and then we spend 2 to 4 years of our lives trying to learn everything we can about that subject. And so, Chad and I are both, I live in New York now, but we're both from small towns, certainly didn't really have much exposure to, I would say Middle Eastern culture, and again, beyond what you're seeing on TV. And so it really, I think in a lot of ways, just blew our minds to be there, to be in a post-revolutionary country, or maybe we call it still revolutionary country, depending on who you are. But just to be there while that's all happening and to see the people on the ground firsthand and to have relationships with people that had nothing to do with soccer and were just, regular Egyptians going about their day trying to make a living, was a really eye-opening experience for us. And it was something that we felt was important to capture in the film. So, we could hopefully show people what life is really like in Egypt versus, what you expect it to be.
Yeah. Were you there at some of those moments when violence was erupting?
Yeah, the very first trip we were there was between the first sort of presidential election and the runoff, and it happened to coincide with the sentencing of Mubarak to life in prison. And so we went to Tahrir Square, and there were probably 50,000 people there. Some were protesting, some, were celebrating, but it was definitely a fascinating introduction to Egypt, and if we had any intimidation, it went right out the window after that because we were right in the middle of it all. And then, as we were there for the rest of the 2 years, there were the warnings from the United States government got stronger and stronger to not go to Egypt, to the point that by the time we were, I think, our last trip there, it was one of those countries that the government says just don't go there, and they were pulling out. At least in August, they were pulling out, non-essential personnel that was there for the U.S. government. So it was an interesting time to be there, but we felt pretty safe the whole time we were there. It wasn't the average person is not going to hurt you, and if you find yourself in the middle of a riot or a protest, you might get caught up in it, but you can pretty much avoid that stuff. And like I said, most people are just going about their day-to-day lives.
As I'm watching it, in the things you're describing to me, it seems like it would be a surreal trip. The whole process, because you're in a country that takes this sport beyond being serious, but they use it as political leverage. That must have been a surreal moment for you as well.
Yeah, it was very surreal, especially in the beginning, to go to these critical matches and have the government ban fans from being there for safety purposes. To then be at one of these matches and basically be able to hear everything the coach is saying from the stands because there's no one there and you're just playing this empty stadium. So surreal. And then just I think that we're thankful that we've had the experience to be in Egypt at that time. It's such a unique point in history. And so to be able to be there and experience that firsthand and see what it's like and see how the people are trying to make it a better place. Surreal is one word. Thankful is another. It's a very fascinating place to be right now.
Yeah, from your point of view, you're American, I'm American. We love our sports, but we can't. I can't really see them using it as a political leverage. How was that shift for you? Trying to present that point of view.
Yeah, I mean it's insane, right? We always try to explain the riot that happened in Port Said.
Yes.
From an American perspective, and so you say, this is like saying the Yankees and Red Sox fans get into a massive fight, leaving a bunch of people dead, and then Major League Baseball suspends its season. You still expect those guys to go home and perform in the World Baseball Classic. And when you think of it like that, and you think how tied into politics is, it's unlike. I mean, I don't really know quite what it would be like here, but it is. It's baffling to see the importance that sport plays there. And, like one of the guys said at the end of the film, if Egypt had qualified, the government would have just co-opted it, and it could have been a really bad thing for the country. It would have been exciting for a moment, but then next thing you know, it's people get caught up in it, and they support the government that's there, even if it's not the best government for them, because the team's playing in the World Cup, and they're proud of their country. So I certainly think there are things like that happen here, but nothing quite on that level.
Yeah. One of the things that you had talked about was how the league was suspended, during that time. What was Bob Bradley's point of view when that first happened?
I think when it first happened, it was, and Bob is a very pragmatic man, so it was, okay, well, how do we keep the guys going? And so they did things like they would just have longer training camps because the guys had nowhere else to go play. So because Bob lived there in Egypt, he would just have longer camps, and they would play whatever game they could play. And, to be quite honest, some of that led to the discovery of some of the younger players, like Mohamed Salah, who was featured in the film. Really got to work with Bob at that time. And so I think in some ways it was good for them to get it would have been nice to have that extended time with those guys, but then also have them play in the league. But, once the guys can't play in the league for 1-2 years, they're not playing regularly. They're not playing day to day. And so, from Bob's perspective, I think it was just how do we keep them going? How can we get them to continue this professional lifestyle and continue, staying in shape and doing everything else they can to get there? And, clearly they did a good job. They went 7-1 overall in World Cup qualifying, which is an amazing record, especially in those circumstances.
One of the things I noticed about the film, it gives you, a great look at, an emerging country, the sport, how important it is to the people. But I noticed, like you just mentioned, how much time there was between games.
Yeah. Yeah.
One would think you would become stir crazy, for Bob, for a guy who's constantly moving. Was there some adjustment needed to happen for him when there was so much time between games?
Yeah, I mean, typically as a coach, I think even as a national team coach, I think it's probably hard to not go stir crazy. But at least your guys are playing, and so you can scout games. You could go all across Egypt to watch these guys play and build your roster that way. When these guys aren't playing and there's that much time between games, yeah, you're totally stuck trying to figure out, what to do with these guys. And so, sure, Bob would watch the guys, the handful of guys that played in Europe or in some of the other African leagues, or a lot of guys end up playing in Switzerland and Portugal. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the coaches in the film says it, like, it's a long time. And I think Bob was lucky that he had his wife there so they could be together and they could chat with their kids every day on Skype or FaceTime. But, if you're a young coach like Tomek who shows up in the film, that's just a lot of time between games. So they would work out with guys. They would take guys to the gym and do special strength training and try to make the best use of the time that way. But there's no substitute for actual real game action.
Yeah, absolutely. In between those times, I'm sure there was a lot of material that didn't make it into the film. Was there some things that Bob was concerned about during that time? Were there some insecurities for him as a coach, or living in a revolutionary country?
He'll say we actually often took our lead from him, and he'll say that in Egypt you can pretty much predict where things are gonna get dicey and when they're gonna be dicey. It's not not a surprise. Often after the Friday prayer, there would be a riot or a rally or a protest. So if you stay at those sort of hot spots, you're pretty good. Now, the exception to that is in August after the coup occurred. Things got a little bit crazier, and it was a little bit more unclear where things are going to happen. But I think, for Bob as the American coach, leading the national team, people were supportive of what he was trying to do, and obviously early on he had results. And so, for the most part, they supported him, and he was, a lot of people say more Egyptian than an Egyptian. So they would. I think he had a wonderful experience there. I think he was always felt very.
One of the things I had noticed right after that major loss, that one of the commentators said, luckily for, I'm paraphrasing, lucky for Bob's past, because otherwise we'd have, slaughtered him with knives and such. And I had to pause for a second and make sure I read what I read. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, I think, to be fair to the Egyptian commentators and the Egyptian people, I don't think that the reaction is that different than it would be. Look, I live in New York, and we take our sports teams very seriously. And so when something goes wrong, it's the end of the world. I think the language there is a little bit different. But I don't think Bob was ever probably physically in danger. But yeah, they certainly take it seriously, and that reaction is it was a pretty funny one when he told us that. We thought, all right, well, that's an honest response to a question.
Did it cross your mind, dude? It's just a game.
It's so much more than a game there, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
You want to say it's just a game, but man, it's just the joy that that country would have felt, and the unanimous joy, right? So that hasn't happened in Egypt for a long time, where everyone is happy.
Right.
If they had gotten there, it would have been a happy day for everybody, and you could reach across the aisle and celebrate with someone that you don't believe have any of the same shared beliefs. So, yeah, it was just a game, but man, it could have been more if they had won it all.
Yeah, right. As we're talking about that, do you think if the loss wasn't so substantial, if maybe it was like a normal loss, like a 1-2 or a 2-3 in scoring, do you think he would have been fired? Any thoughts on that?
I think probably. I think what happens, and we learned this, coming to the film and really looking at it. Well, national team coaches don't typically survive more than one cycle unless they're a special coach or whatever. And so I don't know that I think his contract just ran out at the end of the 2 matches. Now, had he made it, they might have renewed it. and I don't know that if they had made it, I don't know if Bob, his dream has always been to coach in Europe, and so I don't know if he would have wanted to stay on for another cycle. You never know. So I think I think either they made it and they would have offered him an extend, and he would have to choose whether or not he's going to stay, or I think they don't make it no matter what the score is, then he doesn't get to stay.
Right. Did he make any mention of the revolution? I know it all kind of just happened during that time. Do you think it would have been a different team, a different approach, had it just been a normal, soccer term?
Yeah, I think so. I think if that country is just hadn't made the World Cup in 24 years, and he was tasked with taking these guys who mostly play in Egypt, and the league is going on, I think it's, I think it totally changes the outcome. I think he's aware of that. But I think that Bob likes a challenge, and I think he thought it was an interesting challenge and an interesting time to be there, and so I think that was one of the reasons he took that job, versus, could he have just gone and coached in Australia and tried to get Australia through to the next round of the World Cup? I think it probably appealed to him at the opportunity there.
Yeah. Have you guys become friends since then?
With Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob is a great man, and from the day we met him, it was clear that he's a good man with a good soul. He always asked about our kids and our wives, and always has very nice things to say. He's a good man, and I don't imagine that. I don't know that we're best friends, because it's always hard to be friends with your documentary subject. But I certainly think that we are honored to know him and have him as part of our lives.
Yeah. So did he put you through the ringer when you told him that you played a little bit of soccer?
No. It's funny because Chad, who I direct with, grew up playing soccer in Vermont, and in Chad's head, Vermont soccer is top class soccer, and he at one point mentioned that to Bob, and Bob essentially said, Vermont soccer isn't all you think it is. And so that was a good moment. I never put myself out there too much as a player in front of him. Although I'll say I would have loved to play for him. He's an inspirational figure.
So you're just glad. Well, I'm glad I didn't go down that road.
That's right, exactly.
Hey, that's great. Just a couple more questions. Was there anything in the film that didn't make it that you thought, oh, maybe I should have put that in there, or would like to add it later, like in the commentary or something?
No, we initially thought that the film was going to need to start out with like a timeline sequence to sort of give our viewers an understanding of where Egypt, how Egypt got to the point of Egypt, the country, not just the team. And so we had this elaborate timeline worked out, and we were going to have it animated, in a graphic sense, so it was very gettable, and people started from a place of knowledge. But, we worked on it for a couple of weeks, and it just kept falling flat. It was boring. It was informational, but it was boring, and so we felt like this is not the way to open this film. And so we started in a different place, and then have to sort of decide how to dole out the information throughout the film. And how much it was a delicate balance of how much information to give people so they understand, but not but it doesn't take away from the narrative, but also it doesn't dilute the story enough to just say, hey, these guys are good, these guys are bad, because I don't think it's not that easy of a story to tell in Egypt. So I'm actually pretty proud of the balance that we struck with getting the historical stuff in there so people have an understanding of how Egypt became the way it is right now.
So now the big question is, do you root for Egypt, or do you root for the USA when you watch games?
Thankfully we haven't played since we started this project. If Egypt were playing the U.S., if Egypt had made it into the World Cup, they would, if things held the way they do, they'd be in the spot that Ghana has, and maybe they'd be playing the U.S., and that'd be tough. But of course, we root for the red, white, and blue, and it's exciting to see the team do well. It was exciting to see them play Ghana, having experienced the Egypt-Ghana game, or the two legs, rather, of that game. And I don't know if you know, but Michael Bradley, Bob's son, is still on the U.S. team, and he's one of the better players. So it's we have an extra rooting interest for the U.S. now.
Fantastic. Oh, you know what? I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Social media for the film.
Oh, yes. Our Twitter handle is We Must Go Movie. We always push people to iTunes because it tends to be the most common, but it's on Google and it's on Amazon and all that stuff. So, and the website is just WeMustGoMovie.com.
Fantastic. Dave, thanks again. It was great talking to you.
You as well. Take care.